to zoom out for a second, there's kind of this liquidity bubble in a way. fartcoin's at a $1 billion market cap, and fartcoin is a liquid $1 billion. Generally it's not people who are bullish on quantum, they're bullish on the idea of a stock going up a lot. And they sort of have this like vague reference to like the next NVIDIA and quantum is the future. When genomics came around, people said the same thing. They said, Martin, I was a 18-year-old pharma boy. I wasn't even the pharma bro yet, but I was working at a hedge fund and people said, Martin, this is going to change. Everything's going to change. Genomics is going to change everything. Genomics is going to fundamentally change the entire landscape of the way we look at medicine. And the problem with that is it just wasn't true. The genomics market, companies that were quote unquote genomics companies didn't do anything for pharma. There were stocks that went up a lot and they went right back down. And the Human Genome Project was a real thing. Genetics is a real thing. It was very important to mankind. It was very important to medicine in the long run. But the companies that held themselves out to be genomics companies like Human Genome Sciences, they didn't even do any genetics. They just were trad drug developers. Human Genome Sciences back in the day, their biggest thing was albumin fusing recombinant proteins. And, so that stock went down 95% too. A few companies took advantage of advances in genetics, but not directly. They mostly just piggybacked off academics. So whenever a buzzword comes around and people think that they can get rich from some random stock that's like, oh, D-Wave, that's a quantum company. Well, it's not even a quantum company, one. And two, the bubble is not, this is a bubble. There is no quantum opportunity at all. So not only do you have the bubble wrong, but you have the stock wrong too. You have to get them both right. And even then you might not get out alive because the market's generally frothy. So for example, AI is a bubble, but it's a real opportunity in the end. Palantir is a real company with a great product, but it's still so highly valued that I'm not sure it's a great investment. So, it's very hard to just sort of go on Google or Wall Street Bets or whatever and read an article and say, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money on this. And of course, people will pile into this trade thinking that they, are onto something. And usually that's sort of hopefully the top for us short sellers, but it's sort of befuddling and a little bit bemusing to watch, just kind of like total insanity play out in front of your eyes. And, the old saying is, the market can always be crazy and irrational, and it can do that for a very long time. But, I found that unless you are really pigheaded about your bet, generally you can find enough sort of solvency to ride it out. And I think D-Wave is one of these things that, it's hard. I can't imagine this company sort of staying afloat very long because their bookings for this quarter are $1.5 million so far. So this is a company that's worth, $4 billion. So it's pretty hard for it to trade at 200 times sales for very long without growing substantially. And I don't think they will grow very substantially.
I've been holding it for 2 years now, I'd say, I think, but I'm considering selling. But everything you say, I think I would agree, but I think you also underestimate how many people are just now finding out about quantum and starting to trade it. So I think it will take a while for them to realize what's actually going on. So,
Yeah, I think the psychology game is, to some people, that's the only game in the stock market. And the nice thing about the stock market is you can play lots of different games and still be a winner. Some people play index arbitrage, where they buy literally 500 stocks of the S&P 500 and they trade them at fractions of a second against the reference index price in the future. And they make money this way. Some people make hundreds of millions of dollars this way. I don't make money that way. I don't think you do either, because it's a very specialized thing to do. Some people are options market makers. Some people are equities market makers. Some people are private equity investors that hold huge parts of publicly traded companies. Some people do that privately, then they take their companies public. There's about 50 or 100 or more ways to make money in the stock market. And I think that if you want to be a market timer that looks at, psychology, where you say, the vast majority of people don't know anything about quantum computing. That's probably true. The vast majority of people missed NVIDIA. That's also true. The vast majority of people want to make and find the next NVIDIA. Well, what's the next most advanced form of computing? Well, quantum computing.
Yeah, that's the exact way I found out about it, because I have a friend who is studying experimental physics, and 2 years ago, I think even more than that, before D-Wave was even publicly traded, he told me about the company, and I just wrote it down. And then when it was like $1, I found out it went public, and I bought a lot of it, and then just held it. I don't know even what quantum is, anything. So when it like blew up, I just told a few friends about it, and then it kept on blowing up. And now I'm hearing about it from other people. So
right.
Just like a week ago was the first time I heard like a random person tell me about it. So I think it's really just the general public finding out about it, and the news. If you like take a look at the news about D-Wave, everyone is saying everything positive. So
yeah, but don't you think that's a top signal that you're now hearing about it from other people? Like, it's kind of like a chain letter or Ponzi scheme, right? You got in first.
Yeah, but I think people are desperate to get into something where they will like make a lot of money, because every time I hear about it, I hear people comparing it to NVIDIA as something like that has like a product and everything. Have
you looked at the quarterly results at all?
Yeah, I've seen that they just sold that one computer, and that's basically what they made all the money from. So that's why I think they published today that their computer is available for sale, because I think they're hoping to sell it again, so that the next quarter they have again profits, so that they keep the price up. But yeah, who knows?
I don't think that's exactly what they meant. I think what they meant was that you can rent it on the cloud now. That's what it means by generally available.
No, I think I read that it's like available for sale, like that you can buy the computer itself.
No, I don't think they have. I don't think they have any. So like that one-off computer was built very specifically for 𝗔𝗥, and it was like a 6 month to a year process to build it and sell it. I mean, if you listen to the last conference call, they made it pretty clear that they're not going to be selling another computer anytime soon. And then if you look at the bookings, they said that their bookings was 1.5 million, which is very low, obviously. So I don't think anybody is going to be buying the computer anytime soon. And I don't think they have one for sale. Like if you look at inventories, right? Inventories is traditionally where you would have, if you were building a computer for sale, right? It would cost you money to make the computer, right? And you would have that under your inventory section of your balance sheet. But their inventory section only has 1.7 million in it. So I don't think they've actually even built a computer to sell again.
Maybe I read it wrong. I don't know.
It's not about reading. I think they read a lot of things. They write a lot of things that are misleading. Like if you just read the financials, they'll tell you a better story, because if it's a $15 or $20 million computer, it should cost millions of dollars to make. And I think that if it costs millions of dollars to make, they have to have raw materials to construct the computer. If they have those raw materials to construct the computer, they would be on the balance sheet, but they're not on the balance sheet. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. And then the outside of the 𝗔𝗥 one-time sale they made, they haven't sold a computer in 4 years. The last time they sold a computer. So I don't know why they would start selling them left and right again. They didn't give guidance. They used to have guidance. They stopped giving guidance. So if they were going to say, hey, we're going to sell at least one more computer this year, they could have revenue of 30 or 40 million, but they haven't even said that. So I think they're just planning on selling the cloud computing. And again, 2 quarters ago, their revenue was only 2 million. And I think next quarter it'll be 2 million again. So
yeah, I'm just not sure when to sell. That's the only problem. I really think it might go up even more because of people are really writing for it. So I don't know.
Yeah, the psychology is interesting, but I think that at some point you probably do want to see if it's a real company or not, right? Because if the psychology alone can't get the stock up forever, there has to be reality at some point. Because right now the company is worth 4 billion, right? So could it go to 5 billion or 6 billion? Sure.
But you want to hold quantum stock stocks long term, you're going to be holding till like 2035. So if you're going to want to hold quantum stocks long term and think they're actually going to be profitable down the road, that's going to be like 2033 beyond.
Yeah, we don't know, right? I mean, D-Wave is not...
That's still a big if.
Yeah, D-Wave is not even saying that they're building a quantum computer that's going to take a long time. That's the story for Rigetti and IonQ and IBM is, don't worry guys, it's around the corner, breakthroughs coming soon, it's not coming tomorrow, but it's coming. That's the story for every other quantum computer. But for D-Wave, that's not the story. D-Wave's saying, we have it now. And obviously this is a huge lie because their quantum computer is not available on AWS. It's not available on an open cloud like Azure. You can't just rent it. If you try, they call you up and they say, what do you want to use it for? Let's get you into a consulting agreement so we can show you how to use it. And of course, you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars consulting, and they're going to spin you. And when it doesn't work, they're going to say, oh, don't worry, we can work on it even more. And we'll bill you even more. And it's this constant, nonstop billing until you give up.
That sounds like IBM.
Yeah, something like that on a much smaller scale. IBM's a big successful company with a lot of revenue. Yeah, IBM actually has a quantum cloud where you can just go to quantum.ibm.com and you could rent a quantum computer right now from IBM. And they give you 10 minutes for free, and a minute is like $100, so it's not cheap. But I've written code and ran it on IBM, IonQ, and Rigetti quantum computers, but you can't do it for D-Wave. And everybody who tries a D-Wave says that a regular computer is better. So to me, this is like one of the biggest scams I've ever seen. But, psychology is a very powerful force. As you can see, psychology is stronger than rationality. The rational brain would just look at the income statement or the balance sheet and say, oh, okay, this is all a scam. They haven't sold a computer. They get one computer sold in 4 years. How could this be a real company? And, they've made it clear they're not going to sell another computer anytime soon. The last conference call, they said that, it's unlikely. Why is this company worth $4 billion? That I don't know. But I think the FOMO of the next NVIDIA is something where even NVIDIA was, kind of this rinky-dink company that wasn't expected to become the world's biggest company. They kind of fell into it by accident. In 2012, AlexNet came out, and AlexNet showed deep learning works. And ever since AlexNet, there's been this, kind of furious race to make deep learning better and better. And it turns out that the best computer for that is the GPU, and the rest is history. But the problem with analogizing that to quantum is that it presupposes that the 1 in a million happens again. So you have an instrument that's useful for thing X, and by serendipity, it becomes useful for thing Y. This happens a lot in pharma. Viagra was one of these cases. But when I say it happens a lot, it kind of happens one out of every 50 or 100 times. Viagra was designed to be a heart drug. It turns out it was really good for erectile dysfunction. Wonderful. But that's not how most drugs work. Claritin is really great for blocking antihistamine response, or being an antihistamine, I should say, and blocking histamine response, but it doesn't do anything else. Neither do most other drugs. They do one thing. They do one thing well, and that's it. Quantum is, to assume that we're just going to figure out what it does in 10 years or 20 years doesn't really stand to reason. It either will do something really useful or it won't, and we don't really know yet. But that doesn't mean that the likelihood is it will. The likelihood is that it won't. In fact, if you talk to people in the field, they'll tell you there's no actual use for these machines other than the single use of cryptography, which is what got folks excited about it. Cryptography is an interesting field. It's not a huge commercial field. And NSA has already started to point to lots of post-quantum cryptography techniques that are free and easy to implement. And even D-Wave doesn't solve, say, doesn't use Shor's algorithm or anything like that to do quantum speed up. So again, like most of the scientific community thinks D-Wave is a scam. You can look at Scott Aaronson or John Preskill, two of the leading quantum physicists in the world, but both have some hope about the rest of quantum computing. Preskill is the father of quantum computing. Aaronson, I would argue, would maybe the son, but either way, these guys are, experts in quantum computing, and they both think maybe we will get a quantum computer. I think Aaronson is a little more skeptical than Preskill, but when it comes to the subject of quantum annealing and D-Wave, the scientific community is unanimous that these are worthless products. So in any event, that's kind of my 2 cents there. I mean, I do think, to your point, Kirk, that, there is a FOMO, there is a psychology there, but, that applies to every stock. And it very well could be a situation where that FOMO ends, right? When people hear what I have to say, or they read a little bit more and say, like, oh, actually, this isn't a real thing. Oh, turns out that the real quantum company is IBM or Google, and this was all just a bamboozle. It doesn't take long for FOMO to go away as quickly as it came in. If you look at Tilray, that went from 0 to 200 back to 0. These companies will be bigger than Philip Morris, Altria. And then it turns out that none of that was true. The quarter was bad. They didn't have any profits. All it took was a couple of quarters of financials to say, oh yeah, so much for the revolution. Revenue would be going up and earnings would be going up, but they're going down. And that's exactly what's happening with D-Wave. One of the other quantum computing companies, you'll get a kick out of this, is called QUBT. It's called Quantum Computing Inc. QUBT is the ticker. And that stock, this company had $35,000 of revenue. No joke.
Yeah, I heard about that one.
Yeah, $35,000. That was the revenue. That is a absurd, kind of situation. And the D-Wave situation is not much better. They got this computer sold to Jülich. Jülich is kind of this weird German institute that has $1 billion a year budget, and they're supercomputer institute. So for them, they want to own kind of like one of every machine, but they're not doing it because they think it's a good investment. And they just rented it for free. Not even rented it, they lent it to another scientific group that did a research paper that showed it was not faster than a normal computer. So much for 15 million. So that paper is on archive.org, which is kind of the new scientific hub. So I don't know. To me, this is all a scam. There's a lot of momentum and excitement, but this is like sheep being led to the slaughter.
Well, honestly, overall, I would say I'm a bear. But I do like when there's momentum in a market. And, when I see, like, for example, when I saw this morning that they announced, I knew that obviously it wasn't going to pump hard, but I still put a little bit in and kind of rode that wave. But I feel like a lot of people are doing that, which is, constantly pumping up. But would you say that because you are involved, that people are purposely buying this to kind of go against you?
I doubt it. Sense? I mean, squeezing a short. I mean, most of Wall Street is short this stock. In the hedge fund world, this is like one of the better shorts. So I think there's sort of two dynamics where you have short sellers giving up, which of course, is either forceful or not forceful. And then you also have long guys who have FOMO also tend to, like, you build a house of cards, because if you of course, everyone likes momentum, but the problem is momentum stops. And then the momentum trader goes to the next stock. You might go to HIMS or Palantir or whatever other stock is up today and just go buy that stock. And so, elephants squeezing into a hallway create a commotion, but when they squeeze out of the door, they also create a commotion. So I think when a stock is full of momentum traders, it can cut both ways, right? It can go wild to the upside, but it could also go wild to the downside. And we've all seen that. And especially if you don't have people like Palantir is a momentum stock, but it has true believers. There are people who will own Palantir and they're never going to sell it because it's a great company. They're growing revenue, they're growing earnings, they have amazing technology. But D-Wave doesn't have that. I mean, if there are people that are doing that for D-Wave, they're going to be sorely disappointed because they don't have revenue, they don't have growth, they don't have technology. And the momentum guys buying it will be just as fast on the way out as they are on the way up. And there's no gravity in the stock market, but in a situation where there's no fundamentals, kind of gravity does come into play because you can only reach so much heights without having something real. And of course, the meme coin phenomenon also kind of shows you that. Like, there is a top to how big you can get a meme coin. Like, everyone's tried to, even the president did it. But no matter how famous you are, you just can't sustain much growth in the meme coin because it's a greater fool theory of passing a hot potato. And eventually the music stops. People look around the musical chairs for a seat. They try to sit down. And by the time the stock's 16, then 15, then 14, then 13, your momentum trade, you might be down on it. And you want to get out the first sight of weakness. So I think the momentum works great, but it's better if there's substance to the company, like a Palantir or HIMS that have like good products, good revenue growth, things are looking up. You know, the things that D-Wave has going for it are, it's got the word quantum in it. You know, that's a good thing. The company puts out a lot of promotional materials. That's a good thing, I guess. But
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Are you personally going to double down on this position? Are you that strong of a believer?
Yeah.
Or...
You know, I'm going to stick it through. You know, I think it's a zero. You know, this is a worthless company. Its value is literally zero. Their product is faulty. It doesn't provide a value to any of its customers. None of their customers have stood up and said, this helps us. So to me, you know, I'm willing to wait it out. You know, can the psychology cause more pain? Well, it's caused a lot of pain so far. And as you know, in the markets, there's no rule that the stock can't go to 100. It can't, there's no rule that says it can't go to 1,000 or 100,000 a share for that matter. It can trade wherever the buyers and sellers meet. And it only has to trade there for a second. Like GameStop went to it 400 for a second, right? It's never going to see 400 again.
What about the potential of like an acquisition or something where just because they have so much hype that they get cut into, let's say, a ridiculous funding round or something, for example, like the Saudis and their huge investment into AI?
I don't think that's the way the real world works. Like most of the larger companies are, one, they don't really do acquisitions anymore for whatever reason. They just build it in-house. You rarely see these deals. And then two, like they do a lot of research before they buy a company. They don't just spray it around. It's very rare that, you know, a company will do that. It has happened in the past where companies kind of got FOMO. But if you talk to the people at these companies, they're not as excited about quantum as you might think. IBM, for example, they have all the technology they need. They don't need anything from these companies, which are far behind them. D-Wave just doesn't have any technology to speak of, period. It's old technology that nobody wants. So I think like the good thing about quantum that's publicly traded is 2 out of the 4 companies are frauds. QUBT is a company that was a beverage company that last quarter had 35,000 in revenue. Nobody's going to buy them. Why would they? D-Wave is, you know, D-Wave is a product that's faulty. Now, IonQ and Rigetti are different, right? These companies are actually legitimately trying to make a quantum computer. Maybe they'll do it, maybe they won't. But
are you short those companies as well?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Rigetti is really far behind everyone else, and then the space is just a bad space. So like there's a twofold short here. Like I was short this company Humacyte because I didn't think they would get FDA approval of their product. But I also thought that if they did get FDA approval of their product, nobody would use it. And so it turns out that the FDA did approve it. They were able to exert, I guess, enough political pressure on the FDA to get an approval. The FDA guy reviewing it said he did not want it approved. And he even quit in protest when it got approval from a higher up. He said it was medically, you know, insane to approve the product. They approved it anyway. And last quarter, they sold $100,000 of the product, which is not going to sustain a $500 million publicly traded company. The same thing will happen to IonQ and Rigetti. If anybody happens to make the quantum computer, it's probably not going to be these 2 companies. It's probably going to be IBM or Google or Honeywell or, you know, maybe Microsoft is a dark horse. Microsoft is the outside horse here. So like that tells you how hard and unlikely it is that these guys do it. But if one of those companies happens to do it, the problem is going to be the same problem as Humacyte, which is how do you sell this thing? Who wants a quantum computer for what? And there are other types of complex instruments. NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, is a really complex, actually, it makes a quantum computation. And it's used very rarely, but it's used occasionally in material science and pharmaceuticals. That's how I know about it. The main company that makes NMR machines, which are multi-million-dollar machines, just like quantum, is called Bruker, BRKR. It's publicly traded. It's only worth $4 billion, and they sell $1 billion of these machines a year. So it's like a real business, but it's a very finite solution. You can't do lots of things with it. Like NVIDIA, you can write a CUDA program for anything, but you can't really do that with any quantum computer or NMR.
What can you possibly do with it?
So we were not able to factor any numbers larger than 25,000 or 50,000 range. These computers, so right now the state of the art is a desktop computer can factor a 200-digit number. These computers could not factor a 5-digit number. Factoring large numbers is not, that's kind of the special sauce that quantum can do. Peter Shor from MIT years ago came up with something called Shor's algorithm, which is this amazing, I mean, this is the reason I love this space. Paradoxically, I hate the stocks, but I love this space because it was a genius, one of maybe the best genius moments in human civilization, where he said, you can use a quantum computer, which at the time was a theoretical concept, and you can factor a biprime, a number composed of 2 primes. You can factor a biprime in a totally different complexity space than you could with a normal computer. He says you can solve this NP hard problem. And that was incredible. That was a monument to intellect. And we tried to run Shor's algorithm on these quantum computers, but they don't work. The gate fidelity of these computers, in other words, you know what an AND gate and an OR gate is. If you run an AND gate, both inputs have to be 1 for the AND gate to read out 1. The gate fidelity should be 100%. Now, reality is no gates work at 100% fidelity, not even transistor gates that we have in Intel computers or NVIDIA computers. But gate fidelity for quantum computers is exceptionally low. It's around 99.9%. In fact, most of the quantum computers are even worse than that. They're around 99.5. You need, the transistor computers we have today are 99 with 18 nines after the decimal. So if you run a computer program that has 100,000 gates or 1 million gates or 10 million or 100 million gates, if you have a 99.95 fidelity or 99.5 fidelity, it will not work in essence after the program's big enough. So ultimately, I think that, there's just a fundamental flaw with these computers that needs to be remediated. Now, fast forward to your question, fast forward 5 years, 10 years. You have 99.5 nines, 6 nines. By the way, the last time we got an extra 9 was 6 years ago. So we're getting a 9 every 6 years. It's not going great. But let's say we got 99.5 more 9s. That's more or less enough, I think, to start running these programs. So all you could do with these machines is factor a really big number, possibly even the biggest numbers the universe has ever seen that have never been factored before. RSA is 𝗏𝗏 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, MIT professors who created the idea of public key encryption in the 70s. The NSA of Europe, of the UK, actually theoretically had it before them, but we've been using that for 50 years. RSA still has not fallen, so to speak. And RSA put out these challenge numbers. They put out these very large numbers and said, if you can factor these numbers, we'll pay you money. And no one's been able to factor them. But they also put out like hundreds of these numbers. And slowly, the smaller ones got factored. Then the slightly bigger ones have gotten factored. The really big ones look like they'll never be factored, possibly. But with a quantum computer, I do think they'll be factored. The question is, what use is it to divide 21 into 7 and 3? What use is it to divide 35 into 7 and 5? And much, much larger numbers that I can't keep track in my head. What is the use? And the answer is, well, people like the NSA and spies and folks like that have a great use for that because they can crack messages. They can read secret messages that maybe they've harvested or hacked or whatever. And there is a market for that. It's not a huge market. It's in the hundreds of millions, maybe low billions, but it's not a huge market, and it's not relevant to D-Wave because they don't make a general purpose quantum computer. They make an annealer, and it's not relevant to 𝗬𝗢𝗓 because 𝗬𝗢𝗓 is a former beverage company that decided to become a fake quantum company. But if IonQ or Rigetti can beat Microsoft or beat, IBM or beat Google, then they could have this prize 5 years, 10 years, 30 years from now. We don't know when. So they'd have to, one, beat the big companies who have more resources and, better people, I think, but they're big companies and they're not that nimble. And then two, they have to do this in a time frame that makes sense, which I predict will take 30 years. Maybe it'll be 5. We don't know. And then 3, the market has to be big enough to be worth doing, which factoring primes it's not that clear that's that exciting. So quantum bulls have talked about potentially having more applications, but so far I can't even factor 25,000 into, a biprime version of 25,000, like 25023 or something. I can't even factor that number into its prime constituents. What on earth makes me think that I'm going to ever need this computer to do something important? Because your iPhone can factor that faster. A 5 or 6 digit number, a child can factor faster than a quantum computer. So it really is this weird situation where we have this future technology that could be interesting, but the market's gotten ahead of itself. When has this happened before? Genomics.com. Every time, every single time, and people don't learn their lesson. And, history will repeat itself over and over again. The problem is the shorts will get spanked, as I'm getting spanked, and the longs get spanked too. So it's very hard to get timing exactly right.